He thought he had won. He thought he had everything: wealth, power, a new bride from a rich family, and the perfect opportunity to humiliate the woman he once called his wife. That's why he sent her the invitation. Not out of kindness, not out of respect, but out of cruelty. He wanted her to sit there in the church pews, in her simple old clothes, while he stood tall at the altar, wrapped in luxury and pride. He wanted her to see how far he had risen and how far she had fallen. But he didn't know. He didn't know that the woman he had broken, the woman he had abandoned in her darkest days, was no longer the same. He didn't know that the moment she stepped into his wedding, she would turn his proud smile into pure shock. Now, before we step into that dramatic moment, you need to know their story. Because without it, you cannot feel the weight of what happened when she arrived. Not alone, but in a limousine and with triplets by her side. Once, she was a girl full of hope. She didn't have money, no wealth to offer, but her heart was pure. She fell in love with a man who dreamed of success. He was ambitious, always talking about the big house he would own, the expensive cars he would drive, the respect he would command. And she believed in him. She loved him when he had nothing. She loved him when their meals were little more than bread and water. She would skip dinner so that he could eat. She would smile through hunger, through unpaid bills, through nights of shivering cold because the electricity was cut off. She gave him everything: her trust, her loyalty, her heart. But ambition can be a dangerous thing. For him, love was never enough. He wanted more money, status, power. And though she loved him with all her soul, he began to see her as a burden. In his eyes, she wasn't a partner anymore. She was an anchor holding him down. Let me ask you something. If the person you love turned around and told you that your love wasn't enough, that they needed wealth, power, and status more than you, what would you do? Would you fight for them? Or would you let them go? For her, there was no choice. He had already made up his mind. He found another woman, rich, elegant, and from a family that could open doors he never dreamed of walking through. And just like that, he abandoned the one who had been with him when he had nothing. He filed for divorce, cold and heartless, and she signed the papers with trembling hands. She cried that night, clutching the pen that had ended years of sacrifice. She had missed meals for him, hidden her tears for him, broken her back for him. And still, he left. She told herself she would move on. But heartbreak doesn't heal overnight. There were nights she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why love had betrayed her. She missed him, yes, even after all he had done, because the heart doesn't let go as easily as the mind. And while she struggled, he climbed. He married into wealth, built his reputation, began to wear the suits, drive the cars, attend the parties he once dreamed of. From the outside, it looked like he had won. But deep down, arrogance had blinded him. He thought the past was buried forever. Until one day, an envelope arrived at her door. An envelope with gold letters, shining like mockery. It was his wedding invitation. He was marrying again, this time with pomp, with pride, with money dripping from every corner of the event. And he wanted her there. Why? Simple. To disgrace her. To make her sit among the crowd and feel small. To make her see him crowned in glory, while she, the poor ex-wife, hid her face in shame. She stared at the invitation for hours. At first, she thought she would throw it away. Why torture herself? Why step into the lion's den? But then, something changed. Something inside her whispered, "Go, show him who you've become." Now, don't get me wrong, most people in her shoes would have stayed far, far away. If your ex invited you to their wedding, what would you do? Would you go sit there, smiling through your tears? Or would you RSVP with a firm no, then grab some popcorn and wait for gossip to reach you? But she wasn't like most people. She wasn't the weak, poor woman he thought she was. Because in the years after he left, life had taken her on a journey he could never imagine. She had struggled, yes, but she had also risen. Slowly, steadily, she built herself up. She found opportunities. She worked harder than ever. She rebuilt her confidence, her strength, and her dignity. And along the way, she found love again. Real love. A man who saw her not as a burden, but as a blessing. A man who gave her 3 little angels triplets who became her pride and joy. Life wasn't perfect. She had known loss, she had known grief, but she had also known triumph. And by the time the invitation arrived, she was no longer the abandoned, heartbroken woman. She was a mother, a fighter, a woman reborn. So yes, she decided she would attend, but not the way he expected. The wedding day arrived. The groom stood tall, his rich bride glowing at his side, the hall filled with decorations that screamed wealth. Guests whispered about how perfect everything looked. He was smiling, waiting. In his mind, he pictured her sneaking in, head bowed, dressed in something cheap, sitting alone at the back. He couldn't wait to glance at her, to remind himself of how far he had risen. But then the sound of an engine rumbled outside. Heads turned. A limousine, sleek, black, gleaming, pulled up to the entrance. The driver stepped out and opened the door. And when she emerged, silence fell. She stepped out gracefully, dressed in elegance that made even the bride blink twice. And then, behind her, 3 children climbed out, 3 identical faces, holding her hands, walking with her like a royal procession. Gasps filled the air. Guests leaned to each other, whispering. The groom froze, his smile faltering, his eyes wide with disbelief. Triplets. She had arrived, not broken, not poor, not ashamed. She had arrived like a queen. But here's the question everyone was whispering. Whose children were they? Were they his? Had she hidden them all these years? Or was there another story? One he didn't want the world to hear. And just as the murmurs filled the hall, she met his eyes and smiled. Not the smile of a woman defeated, but the smile of someone who knew the tables had turned. What happened next shocked everyone in that room.